Well, the reason I'm standing in Bristol South as an independent is due to the amount of poverty in the area. It's one of the highest recorded areas in the country for poverty. And something has to be done about it, and none of the other politicians so far who've represented Bristol South have really done anything to alleviate the problem. None of the candidates at the moment are very interested in the problem because they're all concentrating on national politics and national issues. And they're leaving the forgotten few behind who are really in dire straits in South Bristol in terms of deprivation and hardship. If you look at the crime statistics, for instance, for March of this year, there were 700 reported crimes in South Bristol. So where there's poverty, there is going to be crime. Where there's high unemployment, there's going to be crime. So we're looking at everything from basic robbery through to sexual assault, domestic violence, attacks on the street, and something has to be done about it because it's quite an interesting area, Bristol South. On one side you've got, I wouldn't say the well-off, certainly not, because none of us are well-off nowadays, but you've got the people who are perhaps a little more comfortable, and then a mile down the road in somewhere like Hartcliffe you've got people in complete poverty, and the area is getting worse and worse because the people are feeling left behind. And now with the closure of Simon's House as well, which is where people go to pay their rents and talk to the council about the various issues and concerns they have in terms of their tenancy and living in the area, that service is being closed down. And it's not just here in South Bristol. All the cuts are affecting the most impoverished parts of Bristol. They're not affecting those, as I say, who are a little more comfortable so much as those who are really desperately in need of help. And if you look at something like Hartcliffe, which has the poorest uptake of internet connection in the country, people aren't able to go online and pay their rent and do everything else they need to do. And as a consequence of which, when they're now falling behind in their rent, even by a week, they're getting letters threatening with eviction. So, you know, it's, people have said to me, why don't you do the hustings? And for one reason is because the hustings aren't really, and I'm not being disrespectful to anyone, they're not my target audience. Because people who go to hustings have sort of made up their mind or are thinking of making up their mind of which way to vote. But while the other politicians are concentrating on that, they're leaving the other people behind who say, why should I vote? Because it's not going to make any difference to me. And so the problem then gets worse. So I'm very interested in standing to try and do something for those who need the help in South Bristol, who are in poverty. Because there is this huge imbalance, as I say, between those who are the poorest and those who are reasonably well off. And it's the 700 crimes reported in March which are affecting the more comfortable people in South Bristol. So there's not even any balance there. So I think by engaging and helping the people who are worst off in South Bristol, we can then begin to address the issues which affect the people who are more comfortable, like the crime, like the assault. Because one thing that's very interesting is that the people who aren't going to be voting in the election, who have no faith in the political system as it stands at the moment, aren't the ones who are going to be going to hustings. They're not going to be the ones who are turning up on polling day and putting their little cross in the box. So, as I say, it's those people we need to engage with, and I'm actually quite happy I haven't been invited to hustings, because that isn't where the issue or the problem is. So that's really why I've decided that I wanted to stand in South Bristol. It's a huge task to try and pull the area back, but if you motivate people and you give them the belief again, then I think we're onto something, and we can do something to address the balance between, if you like, the haves and the have-nots. Because if your house has been burgled or if you've been attacked on the street, you're pretty much in the same position as the people who are most in need. The simple reason for that being, if you have been attacked on the street, the last thing you're going to be thinking about is GDP or Brexit. You're going to be thinking about the problem that you have at that time. Equally, on the other side of the coin, the people who are not going to vote because they're more worried or more concerned about putting food on the table tomorrow or topping up their gas and their electric meters, equally they're not interested in Brexit either, because they just want to focus on what their needs are there and then. So if you like, there's a common interest, and the two need to be balanced together, and I think that's a very strong argument for standing up for people in South Bristol.